I started getting rashes all over my face and neck. And what I noticed is that they get better over the weekend. So I finally kind of connected the two, but I really connected, the workplace with what was causing, the major issues when I took a week off for vacation and everything cleared up.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Indoor Air Podcast brought to you by Change the Air Foundation. My name is Kendra Seymour, and today is one of my favorite kind of episodes because it's a real story of healing and hope. Now, while in the past, a lot of our interviews have focused on people who've gotten sick from hidden mold and water damage in their home, today, my guest, Vanessa Johnson, shares how it was the place she worked that made her sick and started her down this health journey. Now, while Vanessa is a lawyer and nothing today should be construed as legal advice, we're also going to talk some tips for navigating mold and water damage in the workplace, including the role of the American with Disabilities Act in this situation. And Vanessa, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story and for allowing this to be an opportunity for people not only to feel heard, but for them to gain some insight on what are their next steps in this journey. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here and happy to help.
So let's jump right in, because it was your exposure at your job that kind of began this journey for you. So can you talk to us about what happened, what changes you saw in your health, how your employer handled it? Because it's already challenging if it's your own home where you have some degree of control, but when you're talking the workplace, it's a whole nother ballpark. So why don't you kind of start where, things started to change for you at work?
Well, I had just started a new job. The first symptoms that I experienced is fatigue. So, started a new job, new routine. So just, kind of dismiss the fatigue. I also, and I've had this experience when I've entered other places that where I've had exposures, I started having this pressure in my eyes. And I remember within the first 2 weeks of that job, going to my optometrist, but she did a bunch of tests and everything came back normal. So dismissed that as well. But I was getting sick pretty often, just run the mill sinus infections, which I always had like really bad allergies. So I'd done a good job of, kind of managing that. But all of a sudden I was just having recurrent sinus infections, sinus headaches. Some of the fatigue came back, and then we moved to a different area within the building, and then everything just snowballed. I started what really caught my attention, of course, beyond the, kind of flu-like, cold-like symptoms, with the sinus and the headaches and congestion. I started getting rashes all over my face and neck. And what I noticed is that they get better over the weekend. So I finally kind of connected the two, but I really connected, the workplace with what was causing, the major issues when I took a week off for vacation and everything cleared up. And as soon as I went back into that setting, back to square one.
Yeah, to jump in for a moment, that is not an uncommon thing. Like we see that sometimes a lot with like teachers, like they'll be in the building and then there'll be like a 10-day break or something, or they'll go home for the summer and symptoms will improve and then get worse because, they're in a job where you're in and you're out. Okay, so you started to connect the dots. How long was that though, between like, the first day of work and when you're like the light bulb is going off that there is something at work that maybe caused this?
I started, I think in like September, October. It wasn't until May, June that it was really getting bad. And then that's when I started complaining to my employer, saying it's something here at work that's making me sick.
Now, tell us about the place that you work. Like, did you see anything? Did you think mold and water damage at this point, or did you think maybe it was something else, or were you just even unsure of what it was about the environment that was?
I was completely unsure because the major symptoms happened when we moved into a different area that had just been newly renovated. So, I mean, cosmetically it didn't seem, but it was a very old building. But at that time, I mean, I was just clueless. I didn't know what was causing it. Like I said, I'd had a history of allergies and things like that, but it was just out of control, something that I wasn't able to manage. And then once I started, of course, once you start getting rashes on your face, you can't hide it. So you want to do something about it. It's one thing to have a sinus headache. It's another thing to have this huge thing, red and purple mark on your face and neck.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very like strong like fatigue, right? You can try, oh, maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe it's the stress of the new job. Maybe it's a coincidence. But now all of a sudden you're getting these things like rashes and you're like, wait a second, like that wasn't a problem before. Okay,
Right.
so you went to your employer. Tell us about how you approached that and kind of what their response was.
First of all, I was in HR. So, I just, my function was HR. So I just told my boss that I was going to, go to the doctor, a new allergy doctor, and see what was going on. But I definitely felt that it was something in the workplace. And said, I mean, can y'all do some air testing or something like that? So they did the air testing. Meanwhile, I went to the new allergy doctor, and we did, run the mill allergy testing. She was like, oh, well, you are really stuffy when you come in here. I mean, because I was just completely congested. But every single time I go to the doctor, she just give me a new medication to take. Like it really wasn't helping anything. And so they did the air testing. I got my allergy test results. But it wasn't anything really remarkable in the allergy testing. But they wouldn't give me the results to the air testing. They just kept stalling and stalling and stalling. And so, as I was getting sicker and sicker, I was getting more and more frustrated. So I reached out, I filed a report with OSHA. You read my short article about OSHA, so you know my attitude about that organization, because they just really couldn't help me at all. And started the interactive process, but basically my employer wasn't very cooperative. I asked for the accommodation that I asked for was to just move, since the major symptoms started when we moved into that area. I wanted to move outside of that area, and I asked to actually sit with the team that I was supporting as their HR business partner, which was 2 floors down. I think 2 floors down from where we were sitting, but it wouldn't have been with the HR team. And they wouldn't do it.
They wouldn't do it. Okay, so you filed with OSHA, who wasn't much help. And maybe we can, with your permission, maybe we can link to that article because it was interesting. Can you tell us just high level why OSHA was unable to help you in your situation, so people understand the role of that agency and
Well, basically, they said that they couldn't do an investigation because they didn't have a mole standard. So, and especially since the mole wasn't visible, I couldn't like take pictures of it and send it to them. And later on, after I actually left that job, I found out about NIOSH. But even with NIOSH at that time, it was difficult because you had to get multiple people to complain, and other people were having issues, but nobody was having as many issues as I was having. And people are afraid. They started to see some of the retaliation that was happening with me, because as I complained, all of a sudden I went from stellar performer to a problem.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like what, because I think that's a common thing. Like people, I've talked with a lot of people, and they say something to the employer and they're kind of stonewalled. And then all of a sudden life becomes a little bit more difficult at work, right? Like you are essentially sounding an alarm where the correct response is going to cost them money. It's going to cost them time, might impact efficiency. So what things did you start to see those changes in how they treated, you as an employee?
Well, I mean, it was just really clear. I'd been there for less than a year, and I went from getting an early, bonus for the work that I was doing, because I was actually brought in to do a lot of compliance work, and I was making a whole lot of headway with some of the issues that they were having, to all of a sudden just, having bad performance evaluations when it came time for the formal review.
Yeah. So what did you do next? So they aren't going to accommodate you. They didn't want to move you to another place. So what options did you feel you had available to you at that point?
Well, I was still complaining. And then, kind of the turning kicked in. So yeah, I started being really, because it went from, okay, I'm gonna go get this checked out to, being a little adversarial. So they finally gave me the air quality report. And there on my report, it showed that I had a major allergy to aspergillus, and it was a extremely elevated amount of aspergillus. And I'm like, well, what? At this point, I'm really, really sick. I'm completely frustrated. They're retaliating against me. And given my health history, I had lung cancer at 10. I was like, I gotta get out of here. Like, and because at that point, I figured out it had to be something fungal because I'd gone out a prescription. I think I was having some other dermatitis, like seborrheic dermatitis issue that I'd had before. And I went on an antifungal, and some of the rashes cleared up.
Mhm.
And so I found a antifungal specialist. I changed doctors because something else that was a complication of the process is that my new allergy doctor didn't understand her role in the process and didn't understand that I wasn't trying to, like, you know, I don't know what she was thinking. I think she just didn't want to fill out the paperwork saying that I had a disability that needed to be accommodated. And without that, the employer, they could have accommodated me without that information, but they refused to, partly because I couldn't get that documentation from her. Like, I provided my medical records. I gave them opportunity to gather the clearance to gather the medical records themselves, but they didn't do it. And once I got that report with the elevated amount of aspergillus and connected to, I was just like, I need to get out of here.
Yeah. I want to mention something for people listening, because I know the more research you have, if they're in this situation, I believe it was the Mayo Clinic, and we'll link to it in the show notes, that found that 93% of reoccurring sinus infections are fungal related. And so yet we keep, you'll go to the doctor the first time and they'll give you an antibiotic and that's not getting better. Then you go back, well, let's try this antibiotic. And then the third time, and at some point we need to be asking a different question. And so I'll link to that research because it's super interesting. And I'm betting a lot of, unfortunately, allergists and certain specialties aren't even aware of that. And the proof is in the pudding there. You were on an antifungal and all of a sudden things started getting better. And that's a clue for you and whoever's treating you, like, we're onto something here finally. So, okay.
Yeah, but what's crazy, I mean, this happened like 12 years ago. She wasn't, I mean, even though she was a fungal specialist, she didn't connect the two. Like, I mean, and back then you just really didn't have some of the resources that are available now that I'm definitely grateful for, and probably wouldn't be, in as good of health as I am right now without the things that have come out since then. I was really figuring it out on my own and making these connections on my own.
Yeah. And you and I talked about this before, that, our story got over a decade ago as well. And there were far fewer resources. And while we still have a long way to go, I am grateful that there are more organizations, more healthcare practitioners, more things being put into place for people. Because the Change the Air Foundation is trying to do that too. We're trying to provide those reliable resources for people so that they can navigate this. So you ultimately, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, so feel free to back up, decided to leave this job, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I just felt like I had no choice because I took some time off again. I used my vacation because I was like, well, you need to use your vacation before you leave because use it or lose it. And I was feeling so much better. But meanwhile, I went and had some checks to make sure there wasn't anything really seriously wrong with me, because I knew that I was leaving. I hadn't been able to find another job, but I felt like I had to do it for my health. I didn't want to be in a situation where, I got some horrible disease. I'm single. I have my family, but I wouldn't want to burden them. But I was like, I've just got to get out of here. They're not helping me. I'm just, I can't get any help from the doctors. They didn't know what was going on. I'm just getting more and more medications, and I'm getting sicker and sicker. So I left.
And that's such a hard position to be in, and a struggle that a lot of people face. I mean, it's your livelihood, and you have to sometimes make a choice between your health and your livelihood, because employers aren't taking the necessary steps to do it. So what did it look like then? You kind of know now that you had that this indoor air quality, mold and water damage is impacting you. And so you go to look for another job. Did how you approach your next job, was that process a little different now that you're kind of aware of this other health element that you have to take into consideration?
It's crazy. I'm aware of it now, but actually, after I got out of that situation, I transitioned into school. That's kind of always my fallback. I've been a professional student, so I went back to school, and so for basically a year and a half after I left, I wasn't working, but I knew, and I didn't really even connect the two. I knew there was something fungal that was going on in the previous employer that made me really sick. When I got out of it, like the rashes went away, but I definitely wasn't completely well. But all the major symptoms went away. But the law school that I attended, I for my LLMs, which is the programs that I was enrolled in at the time after I left this job, was the same law school that I got my JD in. So I knew there were some water damage issues with the building that following Tropical Storm Allison. So I reacted to the building when I was in the JD program. So I spent less time during the LLM programs in the building because I knew that there was something in the building, but it didn't create any kind of like major symptoms, like the former workplace. But ironically, I went from that environment to what they're not in that building anymore. They have a brand new law school, but I contend that there's mold in that building. So I kind of have to avoid it. But then my first job out of those programs, it ended up being the same situation. I did, but I had different symptoms. I wasn't having as much of the congestion, but I was noticing cognitive problems. And then it took me probably about 10 months in that job to finally put two and two together that it was, my mold illness, the CIRS, kind of flaring up again. And I was having some symptoms and finally connected it with the buildings. But this time, I had a wonderful employer, the employer that I'm still with today, and they were able to accommodate me.
Yeah. I don't want to kind of jump around too much, but for someone listening, what have you found to be helpful accommodations? Like, so that if somebody is going through this, they can maybe ask for some of these things. Is this a good time to also mention ADA, and if and how that plays a role? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, with both employers, I just said I need to engage in the interactive process to figure out an appropriate accommodation. And I think those are the words that you need to use and let them understand that you understand your rights. Because a lot of companies were the first employer, they really, to me, they did not engage in the interactive process. And the law has gone through a change. You have the amendments to the original statute that were meant to address some of the problems that were inherent in the first statute with the focus on the disability. Now with amendments, it's really the employer is supposed to engage in the interactive process and not so much focus on the disability at first. You go through the process to figure out, okay, what is the disability and what's the best accommodation for that disability. But the focus shouldn't be the disability itself. The employer has an obligation to engage in that interactive process. So by, using that phrasing of I'd like to engage in the interactive process in order to determine the appropriate ADA accommodation really kind of signals to them that what your rights are and what their obligations are in the process.
I love that. That is such like a gold nugget, a jewel of information that I think can really empower people. So what were some of the accommodations in this interactive process that you and your employer came up with that you found to be, helpful?
Well, there are a couple of buildings on campus I just do not, now that I really recognize the cognitive effects of being exposed because I'm not getting sometimes it depends on, what's in the building. You just never know what you're being exposed to. I'll get the congestion and the headaches or my eyes will be bloodshot if I'm in a situation for too long. I'm like reacting to it. But there are other times when I'm not, noticing things like that immediately, but then later on, I'm feeling more of the cognitive effects. And so I've learned a lot in the past couple of years in terms of just, I think, everyday exposures. And during the pandemic, I was wearing a mask and I started feeling a whole lot better. And I realized that going to the grocery store, places like that, I was probably being exposed. I mean, I live in Houston, Texas, very, very humid, hot area. So who knows? It might be like 95% of the buildings that I'm encountering that are water damage. So, I just literally I don't teach in this one building that's it is the oldest building on campus. And then there are other buildings that I found that I react to. And so they schedule me in the newest building. I have some concerns about that because I think sort of the maintenance hasn't been as good as I'd liked it to be. And I'm noticing some water damage even in the newest building. But I'm sure if it starts bothering me, then I'll just go back to my dean and tell him and department chair and tell them what's going on. And they've been great so far. I mean, so. But it's always a fear, especially given what I went through with the first employer.
Yeah, and it's juggling a lot. Like I am so grateful that you're here today, not just to share your story, but because this is such an aspect that we haven't as a foundation touched upon yet, but I know is impacting so many people. And we have teachers who reach out and people in other fields. And it's really is a challenge to find those solutions, especially because you touched on it, the prevalence of water damaged buildings and mold and other microbial growth is alarmingly high, right? There's some studies that suggest that up to, 50% of buildings have ongoing problems with leaks and water damage. We know realistically that number is a little bit higher. There's the American Healthy Home Survey 2 data that speaks to the prevalence in our homes as well. So this really is something that your university buildings, your grocery store, your place, like something we need to be thinking about as a country and as a whole. So let's touch for a little bit. I obviously you are very aware of your surroundings and trying to minimize your exposure. You said the one antifungal. Is there any other treatments that or anything you want to mention in that regard that you found helpful that listeners might, want to think about?
I've done a little bit of everything, I think.
It's a very familiar thing we hear from people. I know in our journey too, a little bit of everything, right?
But I think number one, the most important thing is get out of the environment, stop the exposure. If you can, I know that it can be a challenge. I was really lucky in that I had a supportive family that I could kind of lean on for the basically 2 or 3 years. And it basically took me to recover financially from it because, I transitioned into school. I was there, I wasn't working, and then, finally landed a job and was able to go back on my own. But I actually lived with my mother during the second year of those LLM programs as a result of, having to leave the job without finding another one and figure out a way to transition. So I know it can be really difficult, but it's really key in terms of healing. Also changed my diet, pre-health crisis, post-health crisis, totally different. Learned a lot. I read the book, The Autoimmune Solution by Dr. Amy Myers, which really explains, the science behind why you need to change the diet. So really since then, I've, had more of an anti-inflammatory diet. It's hard to stick with those really strict diets all the time, but I've definitely completely changed the way I eat in terms of, trying to avoid foods with toxins or that, create issues for me. So change my diet. That was really important. Like I said, during the pandemic, I realized that, wearing a mask was something that was helping me, recover. And so even though I'm looking like the crazy lady who's still afraid of COVID, I pretty much wear a mask if it's an environment that I don't know anything about. I'm wearing a mask. So that's something that I've been doing that's helping my health. Probably not everybody wants to do that because it does make you feel a little weird when not everybody's wearing masks anymore. And then people assume that it's because of COVID. But I've been in school this past year and let my classmates know, no, this is not really about COVID, even though COVID is not over in my mind, but I'm protecting myself because of this environment.
Yeah,
And
and that's a common thing too. Like it does, and we can pivot there for a moment because most people who have gone through this journey, because of what happened to them, it does change how they live going forward. And you find a new normal. You never quite go back to what you were before, but you find a new normal. And there's some silver linings there, living healthier. But let's pivot there for just a second. So how has this experience kind of shaped your day-to-day life?
it's almost hard to articulate because it's so much my new normal that I don't think I even recognize anymore. I mean, diet definitely. The mask wearing now is a change. I still take a ton of different supplements. In terms of recovery, some things I would have done differently just in hindsight is that the chronic fatigue was really, really bad. And once I started getting better, I realized really if I focused earlier on taking supplements to support my mitochondrial health, some of that probably would have lifted earlier. And, I think a lot of the fatigue is related to the neuroinflammation that I was experiencing. So addressing those things, I think early on are really key because it can help you get the energy to do some of the other things that you need to do. So some of my go-to supplements as far as those are like CoQ10, PQQ, things like that. I followed Dr. Jill Carnahan, so I've used some of those products that she curated with Quicksilver Scientific. So products like that, but also something for me that's been a game changer, which can be a little controversial, but I use ozone. I've gone through several ozone therapies. Like I've done the 10 pass treatment several times. I actually bought my own ozone therapy equipment to do insufflations, and that has really, really helped with my recovery.
Yeah, and I know you and we had talked, prior to this about, finding that knowledgeable healthcare practitioner. It can be hard, right? That's step one. And then financially, it takes a toll because many of these practitioners are, don't accept insurance. And so I want to just take a moment to honor that it's a challenge and it's not always accessible. And, hopefully we can change that with more and more doctors and mainstream medicine accepting the role that our indoor air and mold and water damage has on our health. Now, for those listening, I do just want to point you towards a resource. If you go to changetheairfoundation.org, we have a number of interviews with doctors and healthcare practitioners under our resource section. You can also check out our summit because Vanessa was saying it over and over. This is more than an allergy, right? This is not, oh, I have just the sniffles, and it impacts, system-wide effects. And so, one of the things too that I just want to reiterate with the chronic fatigue is I feel like that is one that is so easily dismissed, especially as you get older. You throw in having, a stressful job or maybe kids, and we tend to put it off. And I know, at least for me, once you connect the dots, once you get to that healthier home and your energy comes back, you realize just how much it was impacting you. And it wasn't because you were in your 40s now or you have kids. And so we want you to live your best life. And for me, it was just a very powerful to feel the difference. And I know for you as well. So, but I know we're running a little over on time, but I'm wondering if there is a message that you could give someone who's out there listening, who might be in the middle of this overwhelming process. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's at home. What would you say to them?
You can recover. I left that job because literally thought it was going to kill me. And I think if I stayed there, it would have. So you have to prioritize your health educate yourself, because often it's going to be, sort of a battle sometimes with the healthcare practitioners, especially if you're going the conventional route. Try to find a functional medicine practitioner, somebody who's mold literate, because that can really help with the process and make it less frustrating. Because some of the conventional methods actually can make you worse, make the battle even harder, but kind of keep hope alive. You can recover. There are a lot more resources out there, thanks to, organizations like Change the Air Foundation and some of the functional medicine practitioners that are, really helping to educate people about CIRS and mold illness and water damage to buildings and really the effects.
Yeah. Thank you so much for again, like sharing your story and joining us. And, for people listening, it's not mold and water damage in the workplace. There are options out there for you. There are solutions that hopefully don't involve you needing to leave, your place of employment. Although we recognize and invest Vanessa's situation, sometimes that really is the only and the best option, even with how hard it is. But we hope to provide more resources. And Vanessa, I may be leaning on you more in the future.
Oh, absolutely.
Help us out. I know I talked to you about maybe writing an article or two for us, because you bring just this wonderful, like, between your HR perspective and your legal mind, and then what happened to you, you have just such a wonderful perspective for people. And so, is there anything else you want to say that we forgot to cover? Or did we get to it all?
No, not really. I mean, I just thank you for the opportunity to tell about my story. I really want to help. I've been intending to try to help, but it's been a long recovery period. I didn't realize some of the cognitive effects that it was having. And now that I'm kind of on the other side of those things, I'm absolutely happy to help. So
yeah, it's a marathon for sure, but it's one worth running, and you can get to the other side. We promise. We've both been there. For everyone listening, thank you so much. If you are watching this on Facebook, do me a favor, hit like and follow or share. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe. And really, the best way to continue to get great information like this is to head on over to our website, changetheairfoundation.org, and sign up for our newsletter. Because you'll get a weekly email from me with wonderful interviews and tips and resources. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.